Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to this latest session in our Navigator Think Tank series. Today we're going to be talking around a quote from MoneyWeek from late last year, which said, if you're a freelancer or contractor currently working outside of the IR35 regime, it is important to talk to clients as soon as possible about how they intend to operate the new rules and whether you'll be affected. It's a very important quote, given that in a current survey of clients, WTT Group indicated that over 50% of those surveyed had not been approached or given any guidance on IR35 as little as 2 months before the reforms were due to be implemented. So it's an important point, but what it doesn't note in there is the role agencies are going to play in those discussions. And we need to perhaps consider how agencies further their approach, further their exposure in the supply chain. So today we're going to talk around contractors talking directly to their clients and the other way around, but how agencies can reinsert themselves into those conversations. Neither the clients nor the freelance workers are IR35 experts, and we need to talk around how agencies can use IR35 or a firm understanding of IR35 to insert themselves back into that chain discussion. As I say, research currently conducted by WTT Group found that just over 80% of all contracts involved one or more agency in the chain. As a result, there's little doubt that agencies have a central role to play in the contingent supply chain. But with end clients being required to take a more active role going forward, active role in compliance and IR35 compliance, we are certainly starting to see more end clients approach us, and I'll ask Carla on this shortly, in a more direct manner to try and adopt a leaner framework and reassess the need for agencies going forward. With this in mind, I think it is sensible to conclude that agencies now more than ever need to be reminding the entire supply chain, not just their clients, not just contractors, but the entire supply chain, why they remain relevant in an important and changing environment. So we're going to look at how this is done. So I introduced the panel today, joined by an expert panel, Tom Wallace, Director of Tax Investigations at WTT, Chris Mattingly, Chief Executive of IR35 Navigator and Contractor Cooperative, and Carla Roberts, Director of Legal at WTT Legal. And we're going to talk around these issues, predominantly focused on IR35 and how agencies can use that to their advantage to reinsert themselves in the supply chain process. So guys, I think it's sensible to start with IR35 compliance, being the big elephant in the room, about to become a bigger elephant in the room when the reforms kick in on the 6th of April this year. For me, I think this is the agency's #1 opportunity to win new business and retain existing clients. And there's a hell of a lot of confusion, misdirection, somewhat scaremongering out there. And it's easy for those tasked with the responsibility of having IR35 compliance clear and set for their agencies and for their own clients to kind of turn off and focus on more immediate and important tasks. As we kind of alluded to, 66% of surveyed contractors indicated that they don't think that their end client is squared away on IR35 reform. That's 66% of people. It's a big proportion who are just left wanting or left lacking any sort of clarity on IR35. And it strikes me that that's a big opportunity. And I wonder what you guys think on that in terms of the immediate benefits or the immediate ways that agencies can start to introduce those discussions into the supply chain. I'm going to come to you first, Tom, and kind of explore some of the ideas that you have with agencies around utilizing the IR35 reform, utilizing the IR35 compliance, and how that can be kind of shifted into discussions.
Sure. Thank you, Rick. Strangely for me, I'm gonna not talk from a tax perspective for a moment. I'm going to purely talk from a business owner perspective. you have a situation here where you as an agency are dependent on your end clients being able to attract good talent. You only have to look at LinkedIn or any of the social media to say contractors are taking a stance now that they are not willing to just be blanketed as inside IR35. At the bare minimum, they want a proper determination done. Ideally, they want to have a compliance framework in place that keeps them outside IR35. Now, if you've got an end client that is not willing to have those sort of discussions, then they're not going to attract contractors. And if they're not going to attract contractors, to be perfectly blunt, you're not going to get the fees for supplying contractors. That's why, for me, from a business perspective, it is so important that you interject yourself into those conversations that end clients are having between themselves, because we know why end clients are taking a risk adverse approach. I mean, not only the risk in terms of financial risk, but they're also taking the risk in also taking an adverse approach because they don't have time. They don't necessarily have the skill level to understand what a compliant framework looks at, and that means that in a time where clearly other financial and worldwide issues are impacting on the discussions in the boardroom, it means that is being pushed to the bottom of the agenda. But for me, it's important that the agency tries to bring that back up the agenda. Actually, this is good for both of us. This is good from a perspective not only of you will attract top talent, but you also, if you are operating in an outside IR35 compliant way, you're not going to have to give an increase in day rates, for example, which contractors will want if they're being assessed as inside IR35. So I think as much as we can talk about the tax position, the business person in all of us should be saying there's important issues here that need to be discussed at boardroom level, and there's opportunities for everyone if they get this right.
Absolutely, and I know I keep coming back to the stats, but I think it's helpful to frame this in real life figures. And of those surveyed, 70% of contractors said they would walk if a blanket ban was applied to their contract. The 70% is a massive figure, and we can see that from when the reforms were due to come in last year. You can see some of the contracts that were put in place. They had whole swathes of contractors from the big banks walking out, contracts and projects just being completely stalled, with no hope of bringing that on board. So I absolutely agree. If agencies can not necessarily convince, but reassure their end clients that blanket banning, blanket policies aren't the way to go, because an efficient and sensible compliance framework can be put in place very quickly, cleanly, and easily with not too much fuss, then that has to be positive for the entire supply chain, the whole supply chain. Contractors get to work in the way that they are genuinely accustomed to and kind of compliantly intended to. Agencies get to generate the very best talent pool and offer the best kind of retained service for their clients and contractors, and clients get the best workers, best access to the talent pool. It has to be the answer for the whole supply chain, and those, from what we see, and I'll ask Chris and Carla this shortly, but from what we see in terms of the very kind of senior top level talent to contractors, they back themselves to find another contract. So they will walk, as Bernie said in our session last week, they'll vote with their feet and they'll walk out of these contracts. And so what are you left with? You're left with contractors who are more comfortable taking a determination thrust on them, perhaps inaccurately, who are perhaps not as experienced, not as confident in their position and their ability to deliver on the contract and project. So it doesn't make sense to apply that. It's commercial risk, financial risk, and project risk all in one thing. So yeah, I completely agree. If agencies can insert themselves to have that discussion and wind back on these blanket banning policies, it has to be good for the whole supply chain. Chris, do you have any thoughts on that, kind of particularly around blanket banning, or more, I guess, in terms of what service agencies can provide end clients, particularly in your role as Chief Exec of IR35 Navigator 2?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think ultimately this all comes down to risk reward, supply and demand, and it's really just a case of working through the processes. And I think ultimately this is a great opportunity for those that embrace this and get on top of things. And in providing a compliant framework, I think it will be those companies that will attract the best talent, and certainly that's what we're seeing coming through at the moment, is that those that are taking a positive approach to the new reforms are the ones that are likely to succeed in the future. Sure, we're seeing a lot of people also put their sort of head in the sand and sort of just hope that it blows over, but I think the ones that will survive this will be the ones that are actively engaging with their talent pool and their clients to provide that framework.
I absolutely agree. Carla, I mentioned at the start there that in terms of more and more end clients looking to adopt kind of statement of work type arrangements or direct engagement with their contractors, can you talk a little bit more about the experience of what you're in your capacity as a lawyer operating very squarely in this market?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we've seen a lot of clients spooked by the legislation, mainly because agencies who haven't been able to give them that reassurance and comfort that they will comply with the legislation. They'll do the status determination checks for them, and they're adequately insured as fee payer. And it's just like any other compliance task that agencies have had to do in the past, whether it's immigration, CRB checks, or whatever. SDS is just another one of those. But for those clients that haven't received that reassurance or that comfort from agencies, a lot of them are just backing off completely, as we've discussed, from having contractors, and are looking at alternatives. Statement of work has been around for years. It's been the predominant model used in the States. In the States, you either have temps or you have freelancers. So a lot of clients are starting to see the benefits of that, because obviously it's a genuinely outsourced service, but they need to be able to relinquish control completely to the contractor. And I think that's a model that some of them are just trying to get their heads around. But yes, we're definitely seeing more and more inquiries about statement of work and the risks and benefits for both the clients and for the contractors in that respect.
And I think coming back to that point you're saying about just another kind of additional check on things, clearly agencies have always been big time savers for end clients in terms of hiring process, negotiation of contract value, all of the contracts being squared away, and providing those additional services. I think it's a good question for the panel in terms of those are the tried and tested routes and processes that agencies have had to go through. Do we see IR35 as hugely cumbersome beyond those kind of contracts? Do we see it as a real problem that it's being purported to be, or do we see it as just another thing that agencies just need to get squared away in their processes, squared away in their policies, squared away in their documents? And I think if so, how can that be done? How should agencies be looking at putting that in place? Carla, perhaps I can come back to you first of all in terms of the how cumbersome is that compliance framework to implement?
Yeah, yes, we've seen this over and over again in the staffing industry, whether it's AWR, the Onshore or Offshore Intermediaries Act, or pension legislation. Every single time agencies believe it's the end of contracting, and that they're going to lose substantial numbers of contractors. That doesn't need to happen, and I don't think it's going to happen in this case, as long as agencies have proper systems and controls in place to give clients the confidence and comfort that they are being compliant with off-payroll. So I think it'll just be business as usual. I don't see any particular hurdles for agencies, but they just need to make sure that they and their end clients understand their legal responsibilities, and they have the appropriate contractual indemnities in place throughout the supply chain.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I think it's, well, from my perspective, from the frameworks that we put in place, yes, there needs to be some initial reviews and initial setups, but once you're off to the races and going, it's just another kind of general process to put in place. I agree. Chris, I mean, what are you, oh, sorry, Tom.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think Carla said something that actually is the key here. It's business as usual. This isn't something that's going to be a flash in the pan. So you either get to grips with it now, or you play catch up in 12 months time, because there's going to come a point where you're left behind in the market. If you decide that you're not going to engage with the IR35 and set up those processes now, and others do, they've stolen March on you. So I think it's really key to learn that this is business as usual. And if you don't have the expertise, then you bring that, you either invest in getting that expertise internally, or you bring external expertise in to manage that process for you. Because let's be honest here, IR35 isn't new. You know, all we're saying here in the reforms is that a different person has to make the determination. Actually, you know, IR35 as a piece of legislation, as case law, has developed over the last 20 years. So the expertise is there. It's just a case whether you want to spend the time developing that internally or bringing in external resource to do it. But not doing it, I personally do not think is an option in this market.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think, I mean, I think we've all seen it. There was obviously the extensions to the reforms last year were helpful for many. Do you think there's an element of hoping that there's going to be further extensions? And I think we can categorically say that's not going to happen now, but is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it on LinkedIn. I've seen, are we going to get an extension? We've got a budget coming up early March. Let's be honest here. The extension was a surprise first time around. It was enacted in legislation in the last finance bill. It is now part of the Finance Act. It would need legislation to remove it at this point for it not to be effective from 6th of April. And I'm pretty comfortable putting a hefty bet on the fact that that will not feature in the Chancellor's budget in a situation where he's going to be looking to raise taxes and not necessarily create tax advantages or tax breaks.
Yeah, particularly for the self-employed, I think, as well. Yeah. Chris, I mean, in terms of that, Carla and Tom have both said that very neatly, is that the compliance framework needs to be adopted. It needs to be established. There's no kind of ways around it. There's no ways to leapfrog it, but it can be implemented quite neatly and cleanly. I mean, in terms of your role as Chief Exec of IR35 Navigator, obviously there's a number of tech-based platforms out there that are adopting. Perhaps you could just talk us through what a compliance framework looks like from your perspective, what the processes need to be done so that agencies can go and have those discussions with their clients. Do they do those on their own? Do they bring in some support? How do they best implement that framework from kind of now to straddle the reforms and into the future?
Well, the compliance framework or the process itself really needs to look at the two factors. We've got, I guess the easy one is just looking at the contract, and that's just making sure that there's nothing contradicting in the contracts to sort of conflict with the IR35 status decision. But then most importantly, it's going to be the working practices. So I think here that's the key thing, is just looking at the relationship between the worker and the end hiring organization, and just working through the steps to make sure that the situation is very clear in terms of the IR35 status, be it inside or outside. And of course, if there are any inconsistencies, then those inconsistencies need to be worked through with all parties of the supply chain to make sure that ultimately a decision can be issued with confidence, and that if the engagement is considered to be outside IR35, then everyone can move ahead feeling confident and comfortable in the decision that's being taken. When it comes to looking at what's going on in the market in terms of assessment, then a lot has been talked about assessment tools. Obviously, we've got CEST itself, and various other third-party tools that aim to use an algorithm to try and answer this question. Is the engagement inside or outside IR35? And the issue with this process is, well, first of all, the decision is binary. The outcome is either that the engagement is inside or outside. But of course, these tools, given that they're algorithms and essentially just a computed result, are just looking to take inputs and turn that into an answer. Now, of course, if you put garbage into the system, then you're going to get garbage out. So, quite frankly, you've got situations there where, answers could be provided by these tools that, for instance, might suggest the engagement is, 85% outside IR35. Now, of course, that's no good. Really, decisions need to be made with a lot more certainty to say the engagement is, 100% outside or it's 100% inside. So I think this is where we need to fall back on just looking at the engagement, looking at the contract, but looking properly at the working practices, and that can only really come through human intervention. So this is really looking at having dialogue, having conversations, understanding how the work is being conducted on the ground. And if at the end of the day, the outcome is such that it doesn't reflect one of employment and that the contractor is, truly in business of their own account, then I think it's, that's the right process. You end up with the right answer, and again, everyone can have confidence that the correct steps have been taken, and the compliance framework has delivered the correct result. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's all about talking and working through the inputs and making sure you come up with that right decision. Just relying on putting a few questions and answers into a website is not really providing a compliance framework.
Absolutely, and as we said on the roundtable last week, there was a kind of nod to the fact that CEST is not covered under pretty much every insurance policy out there as well. So that kind of algorithm-based assessment just isn't good enough in terms of protecting the supply chain. But what you've kind of noted there is really that need to open up and increase transparency in the supply chain, and everyone, as in every single party in that, talking, discussing, understanding the working practices, understanding the contract, understanding what everyone's duty bound to do, understanding what everyone's compliance framework and compliance process is, and then implementing the project on that basis. That's the key. The second part to that, which is, okay, it's very good at the start and the outset of saying this is how we're going to all do it, but then doing something completely differently, which is what we see all too often, is where HMRC start to get excited. So a continuous kind of appraisal of the situation for all those in the chain is essential as well. And I know as IR35 Navigator, we kind of continuously review on a quarterly basis the working practices, just to make sure everyone's still working in the same way. And that's all recorded through blockchain as well, so that if HMRC come kind of with an investigation, you can evidence that all the relevant parties knew exactly what was going on, that reasonable care has been taken all the way through the chain. And I think that, for me, is the only way to be certain that all the parties are operating in the right way, which is so essential. But I think the important point there is that who's the middle person in all of that? Well, it's the agency. The agency has a great position to sit themselves in the middle, link up the supply chain and get everyone talking to each other. if they're to do that, they have to know their stuff. They have to know their compliance. They have to be certain that what they're providing their client is the right compliance framework. They have to be certain that what they're saying to the contractor is right, and tying up those things. But it's a massive opportunity for agencies to retain and win new clients on the basis that the client effectively can't do without them, because the agency sits there with a really efficient compliance process. The end client can't depart from that, because the supply chain is all very, very reliant and very dependent on the agency continuing that and enforcing that, because the risk of doing something else commercially and financially is too high. So for me, that comes back to the point of how agencies can reinsert themselves into the discussion, is to A, know their stuff, but B, assert themselves as the kind of link and the go-between as their rightful place between the contractor and the end client. Get those discussions going, get that transparency up, utilize a transparent platform, utilize everything to get everyone communicating in an efficient way, because that's going to serve the supply chain so well going forward.
Maurice, if I could just add that if agencies aren't feeling competent or capable of actually doing a comprehensive analysis of the working practices in the contract, they really should outsource that. And totally agree with what Chris has said about algorithms. I mean, algorithms do not really take a comprehensive look at the working practices. You could put in an answer to a question about substitution and you're automatically outside IR35. And it's not about one piece of the puzzle, it's about all of the pieces in making an assessment. And that's why a traditional IR35 assessment is so important. And of course, there is the obligation to take reasonable care, as you've alluded to. So if an agency does not have that capability in-house, it's something really that they should outsource to somebody who understands it properly.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can see Tom itching to jump into the conversation.
No, I was just going to say, no, I agree with Carla there, but I think the agency needs to reconsider its role in the bigger picture here. Agencies traditionally have seen themselves as their role is to put A and B together. Once A and B are put together, job done. And actually, I think their role needs to develop into a much more compliance and monitoring role, and that changes the business model, and I get that, and I understand why agencies might be hesitant to do that, because if they're operating on fairly slim margins, then I understand that. But if that's the case, then in the new world, your business model is broken, and you need to have a rethink of how you fit into this, like I say, the new world. Managing the compliance chain is, in my point of view, the job of that man in the middle, that agency, because they can see the chain at both ends, and only they can join it up. So I agree with everything that everyone around this table has said, and I just think that it's time agencies now just reconsider what their role in this is. I think it's bigger than just putting A and B together and moving on.
Absolutely. I think we touched on this in a previous session with Alex Arno, who gave a case study of one company that put in place retainer fees and grew their purchase to 7 times turnover. I mean, what you're saying there is that this pleads the case for continued fees. If we're hiring into the position on a temporary basis and then monitoring and continuously monitoring that to me is a service that's an ongoing thing. That's not a one-off placement fee. That's pleading the case for continued retainer fees. And I think you've made a point there of how you fit into the new world. For me, it's about how you mold and lead the new world. I think there's a huge opportunity here for agencies to adjust and be really unique and dynamic with their charging models and how they do some work. And it's IR35 being the biggest concern for the industry that's been put in place for a while. is a great opportunity and a great kind of watershed moment to do that, I think. So yeah, I completely agree. I think agencies need to be reconsidering how they survive and thrive in this new era, by looking at how IR35 can lead that and lead those changes. Absolutely. Sorry, Chris, are you going to say something there? No?
I guess just really confirming perhaps what we've already discussed, to say that they really need to reassert themselves back into the process. Failure to embrace IR35 will ultimately mean that risk-averse clients will decide not to engage contractors, or if they do continue to engage contractors, they're going to be looking to work with an agency that understands IR35. So I don't think there's, if they do nothing, they're likely to certainly achieve nothing. So really, it's about reasserting themselves back into the process, getting in front of the client, and really letting them know that they've got it covered, and that they can provide all the necessary framework to be able to engage contractors in a compliant way, and that's the key to it. But if they can deliver that, then this is a massive opportunity.
Basically saying there's no excuses.
Yeah.
Carla, coming back to your point, you either understand it or you outsource it. Can you kind of help agencies listening or listening to this to understand how they kind of implement their own compliance understanding into those things like CEST tools? We've been clear that CEST isn't enough, but it's inevitable that some agencies will need to rely on CEST and their own compliance understanding initially to get them over the reforms. As much as we disagree with that approach, it's inevitable that will happen. So can we kind of make some initial pointers that are going to allow agencies to kind of interpret CEST properly, interpret the working practices, interpret the contracts, and have those proper discussions with the end clients as a starting point, even if they don't outsource for the time being? What are the key things that you're looking for from a kind of a review perspective?
Well, I think it's important to first say that agencies have to do a comprehensive review, because if they don't, it could be perceived as a conflict of interest if they're just saying, no, the contractor's outside IR35, because that's what the client wants. So obviously, if reasonable care hasn't been used, then they could be deemed liable. So doing a comprehensive review is absolutely crucial. And that would include looking at primarily the 4 pillars of IR35, which are supervision, direction, and control, the right of substitution, the lack of mutuality of obligation, and the taking of financial risk. And associated with those 4 categories are numerous detailed questions that really need to be asked, i.e. whether or not the contractor is part and parcel of the organization, whether or not he's got his own premises, has his own website, whether it's a business-to-business arrangement, whether or not he's got his own insurance. So it's really important that the agency scrutinizes each of those details, even going to the extent of confirming the existence of insurance. So not only should they ask those questions of the contractor, but they may even want to take attendance notes if they have a chat with them on the phone. And then, of course, create some sort of written report at the end of it all. So it can be time consuming, but it is such an important thing to get right, obviously because of the tax liabilities.
Excellent, that's awesome. Okay, I think we've covered IR35 a lot there. I mean, there are other ways that agencies can be inserting themselves into the chain. And clearly, in this new working world, we're all kind of trepidatious about and very uncertain about going forward. There's going to be more and more kind of remote working and off-site roles, and that obviously has its own impact on IR35 from a perspective of contract being performed elsewhere other than the main office, or where that main office now is perceived to be. But I wonder whether you guys can offer a little bit more around what agencies really bring to the party aside from compliance. Things like contract negotiations, really big and onerous task for end clients to have to do directly with contractors, and can, in some instances, take the contract going forward. Carla, you've got a lot of experience in terms of your previous roles as chief counsel at some of the bigger recruitment agencies in the UK. What was your reason for utilizing agencies? What did you consider them to bring to the party? And how can agencies kind of reassert that now?
Well, the primary responsibility and the traditional role of a staffing agency is to source a candidate. So most agencies will have a pool of contractors and candidates on their database. So traditionally, that is why a client will go to an agency, is to find somebody who's skilled for whatever project that they've got that needs to be completed. But in addition to that, agencies in recent years have also taken on the responsibility of being the employment for the purposes of the employer, for the purposes of the role. And that's not meaning that they employ the contractor, but basically they engage them. But they're responsible for doing the checks, for example, the immigration checks, any other checks relating to their skills and qualifications. And I think the role of agencies has just evolved as the years have gone on, and as more and more legislation is implemented, whether it's AWR, pensions, immigration, data protection, and clients are just wanting to flow down those compliance responsibilities to the agencies. And of course, in a business-to-business relationship with a contractor, the agency will again flow down those obligations to the contractor. So that's how it works. It's just a flow down of liabilities right down the contractual chain.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, Chris, do you have anything to add to that in terms of where agencies can provide continued value?
Well, I guess if you just look at it another way from the client's point of view, is that they're looking to, hire contingent labor, and quite simply, they want to do that with confidence and with the ability to sort of turn the tap on or turn the tap off as and when required. So, I mean, what they're looking for there in an agency is someone to take all of their problems away and just enable them, to get on with running their business, and for all matters relating to labor to be dealt with by the agency. And so, again, clearly any agency that sort of steps up to the plate in that sense and takes all of those problems away, including IR35 reforms, as we've been discussing, is the agency that's going to win the business.
Absolutely. And I mean, from what Carla was saying earlier about statement of work contracts, seeing some agencies kind of ring fencing provisions and ring fencing services to provide a fully bespoke solution. In the kind of working world where everyone's remote, perhaps those kind of services are going to become more and more prevalent in terms of off-site training, off-site work, all of these things being actually provided by an agency. Again, coming back to Tom's point around change of business model, look to pivot into a new opportunity, because there is a lot of opportunity out there to not be that kind of, well, I just place and leave. I mean, continued compliance, continued training, fully outsourced bits of work. I mean, there's just so much that can be achieved, and I think agencies, as I keep saying, have a great opportunity to try and take some of those opportunities of kind of taking away some of the responsibility and the burden of end clients and providing them genuinely excellent services going forward.
I mean, it's value added, Reece, and what you do have as an agency is you have a large database of people who are in a certain sector or certain field. Utilize that. Listen, let's think outside the box. Okay, it's not your job as an agency, but can you do a deal with Dell or Apple or someone to if you can source 150 MacBooks, does your client base, if you've got 150 people in your client base that will take that at a discount, okay, perhaps there's no profit in it for you, but do you know what? People are going to think highly of you, and they're going to be the first person they think of when they're looking for a role or saying, look, I'm recommending someone because do you know what? Be on this agency's books because they're going to look after you in other ways than just putting A and B together, which may not work. You might walk from B after 2 weeks because you're not the right fit, because all they were interested in was generating a one-time fee. Get that relationship to be a lasting relationship by adding value.
Absolutely. And I think coming back to it, rather frustratingly, coming back to IR35 is, again, a really central point to that, because too many people are looking at IR35 as a kind of a burden to just do a one-off review, get it done, move on, carry on with business as usual. But as we've all said, this is business as usual. IR35 should be the central point of those discussions on a continued basis, to have those person-to-person discussions, to not be kind of a faceless agency, to increase reliance on your business model and your services going forward. It presents such a good route forward for agencies in terms of reasserting their dominance over the supply chain, I think. And you're absolutely right, Tom. If you can add additional benefits, doesn't matter how kind of large scale or important those are, but if your client uses them, then they're going to find it difficult to depart from your services.
And a lot of clients have headcount restraints. They're not in a position to take on contractors, but they can engage with an agency on a statement of work basis. So we are seeing some agencies morph into that new model, but they need to be very careful, because obviously that model is not your traditional staffing. It is the provision of a fully contracted out service where the agency is owning the outcome. The agency is providing the service. So that involves getting a different type of insurance. It involves more risk, but obviously the benefits can be enormous. And there are so many opportunities for agencies who are willing to embrace that new SOW model at the moment.
And that really requires kind of ongoing monitoring and to make sure you're not hitting over the certain thresholds. And yeah, I think continuous compliance on that model is essential. But as you say, very, very remunerative if it's done correctly, and a good positive opportunity there too. Yeah. Okay. Any other points that people want to make around the agencies reinserting themselves? No, all covered. Good. Okay, another fantastic session. I think the summary is that agencies have a hell of a lot going for them, and it's inevitable that agencies are never going to become obsolete. In a world where end clients might be toying with the idea of a leaner supply chain, I think we've come to the summation that agencies have a great opportunity to ensure that doesn't happen, to evidence their value, especially with the changes that are happening now, by taking the opportunity and making themselves really unique and really future-proof to the supply chain. That for me means opening out the supply chain fully, to be very transparent, have all of the discussions, and kind of make sure everything is really watertight going forward. Before we go, I'm going to ask you all a question around IR35 Navigator and how you think one way IR35 Navigator can help those agencies have those discussions with end clients and with contractors. Carlo, I'm going to come to you first. Where do you see IR35 Navigator really helping people, agencies, insert themselves into that discussion?
Well, I think I talked earlier about the fact that agencies who don't have the internal expertise and can't provide that comfort to the client that they've got the systems and controls in place. IR35 Navigator is a perfect solution for them because they can outsource that to IR35 Navigator and be confident that the IR35 reviews are comprehensive. There's no conflict of interest, and the reviews will be conducted by a law firm.
Yeah.
And that meets the reasonable care standard.
Yeah, excellent. Chris, same question to you.
I think the key, I guess, focusing on one of the key benefits that IR35 Navigator will provide is that of supply chain transparency. A lot of focus is placed on, IR35 itself and contracts and working practices, but it's also about the supply chain. It's understanding, who is in the supply chain and who you're working with. So, I mean, one of the key components of our service is to examine that supply chain and make sure that the supply chain as a whole is legitimate. And I think for anyone that's concerned about things like the Criminal Finances Act, needs to be very mindful of that. They need to be very certain that there aren't any companies that are being inserted into the supply chain, typically lower down, for the purposes of allowing individuals to enter into tax avoidance. So I think that's a key thing, is providing that supply chain transparency. And then second to that is the option of being able to step into the fee payer role. So for any agency that is really concerned about the potential liabilities that might arise as a result of being the fee payer in terms of status decisions that ultimately challenged and found to be inside IR35 is the ability for IR35 Navigator to act as the fee payer. And I think that for those that are looking for that certainty will be of great benefit.
Absolutely. Tom, same question to you. For
me, IR35 Navigator is a genuine partner to your business. By that, I mean that it's in both our interests to see your business flourish and grow. And if that means that, myself or Chris or Reese or Carla has to sit down with your end client to explain the process, to walk them through it, to explain the benefits and how the blockchain technology gives the security from a compliance point of view, then that is exactly what we'll do. This isn't a service that's being sold for you to go off and just utilize it as you see fit. It's very much a hand-in-hand relationship, and quite frankly, there's no algorithm in the world that can do that for you. So for me, that's the selling point.
Well, there we have it. Tax, legal, compliance, and commercial all wrapped into one. Good. Okay. Fantastic session again. Thank you all for your time. As always, if anyone has any questions following this and wants to catch up with any of us to talk through how they can be looking to have those discussions with their end clients, feel free to contact us on the usual ways. And until next week, we look forward to hearing from you then. Take care.